Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar Top 10 video. This is going to be episode 2, though I'm not really going to number these videos. You won't see the episode number in the title. They're just going to be in like a playlist. But in case you're wondering, this is the second one. Last week I did my top 10 favorite Avatar episodes to start these off. This week, as you can see from the video title, top 10 Korra episodes. So yeah, that's what I'm doing this week, and then I'll reveal what I'm doing next week at the end of this video, and I'll continue to do it in that format from here on out. But as an intro, I suppose, to this topic, before I get straight into my top 10, I think Korra has a lot of really good episodes. In general, I'd probably say that on average there is more to an episode of Korra than on average there is to an episode of Avatar. Obviously there are exceptions to that rule and stuff like that, but because of the format of Korra having very like a low number of episodes per season, it means every episode is very tightly written to fit in everything it needs to. And that means that there is a lot in every episode of Korra, so there's a lot of really high quality episodes. And it's just, I'd say it's actually really hard to make a low, a kind of like bottom episodes that make the bottom of your list for Korra. But this is the top episode list, and definitely it's hard to make just because a lot of the episodes of Korra are on a very similar quality level, I think. And it's really hard to kind of like just pick out, okay, these are the obvious standouts from an overall excellent series. Of course, the finales are like obvious ones to go for, but the finales don't always, necessarily make up 10 episodes. In this case, in this episode, that's kind of the case. And so it's definitely about those other episodes that are just normal parts of the seasons that I think are going to interest you. On my list in particular, I think is going to be interesting because I think, and you guys have probably said this to me in the past, I have a slightly different view on the series overall in terms of which books are my favorite compared to other people, and that you'll pretty much see that come across as we go through my episodes, that it very much represents my view on the books, and that book 2 is my favourite, book 4 is my second favourite, then book 1, and then book 3 is bottom of the list. And that comes across in the number of episodes per season that are in my top 10 list. And I hope you kind of see that come across. But yeah, let's get into the list now with my number 10 pick to start off my top 10 Korra episode list. So as you can see, number 10 is K202, The Southern Lights. Now this is probably the most surprising episode you'll see on my list, primarily because I know that within the fandom this episode really doesn't get a lot of respect. I think most people will probably rate this as one of the lower ranked episodes of the series, but for me, I think this is probably one of the best of book 2. Yes, the second half of book 2 is on such an epic scale that some of the first few episodes kind of are lower down, but I think this is the episode early on in the book that kind of, without it, book 2 can't be what it is later on, because this is the episode where Korra, you really see what she learned from Unalaq, and how she actually becomes a more spiritual person, and how the spiritual stuff in book 2 Spirit really starts to come like heavily into play. Not even just the Korra and Unalaq stuff out in the kind of wilderness, but also you have, this is the first moment where you really see Janora's connection with the spirits, when she sees the statue of Wan and stuff like that. So there's some very cool moments throughout this entire episode, and it really, I think, plays a good bookmark with the final episode, because this is the episode where Unalaq teaches her things that she eventually later uses to defeat Unalaq. In that his whole line, "Find the light in the dark," that he uses in this episode is the name of the last episode. And just the spirit technique, the spirit bending technique, it's effectively kind of like this episode where she learns that. So I think there's some really interesting stuff in this episode overall, especially like towards the end with her unlocking the portals and stuff like that. It's I think it's a really strong episode in the book, and very underappreciated by the fandom, but it definitely makes my top 10 list. But yeah, onwards to number 9. As you can see, number 9 is K409 Beyond the Wilds. This is a really important episode in the overall kind of arc of the series, especially it being in the last season. This is the episode where effectively Korra completes her recovery, and I thought it was really incredible the way they did it. They linked it in with book 3 and had Korra go to see the only surviving member of the villains from the last book, Zahir. And I think this book, retroactively made book 3 better because you brought one of the villains back and made him important to Korra's arc in the final book, in that ultimately she had to confront the guy that nearly killed her to kind of get past her problems. And that conversation that they have is just so well done, because ultimately what it comes down to is that they both have a similar enemy in Kuvira, in that Zahir's ideals go completely against what Kuvira is trying to do, and so they have to work together against a common enemy. And for Zahir to basically get rid of Kuvira, he has to help Korra get over basically what he did to her, and just the stuff he points out to her is just amazing. Like just this idea about how powerful she actually is, and that the poison should have killed her but it didn't, and that instead of making you afraid of things, should actually make you stronger, because it should have but it didn't kill you. And then just the idea that he, despite being probably the villain who hurt her the most, can still go to the spirit world, yet she, as the hero who's defeated all these villains, is so kind of conflicted and hurt by what happened with the past villains that she's kind of blocked herself from going into the spirit world, and he is the only one who can actually help her get back in. There's some amazing stuff going on in this episode that I just really, really appreciate. And in the end, how he basically just tells her, watch the full vision. You don't die here. And when she finally does, she really realizes what's going on, and then in the spirit world she reconnects with Rava, and she's fully healed, saves Jinora and Co from from the whole spirit vines attacking, and it just played in perfectly to what was going on in the series at that point in time with the whole spirit vine plot and stuff like that. So I really appreciate this as an episode. It's definitely not the strongest episode, but I think in terms of telling a story that's important and almost kind of like a standalone episode in book 4, it's really well done, so that's why it makes my number 9 spot. But let's go on to number 8. So yes, at number 8 is K312 Enter the Void, the second last episode of book 3, Change. You'll probably notice this is a thing on my list in general, in that usually I probably would do these lists by actually putting multiple parts of a multi-part episode on the list. But because with this list, and I did it with the Avatar list as well, it would make some of the list a little bit boring for me to have just like, okay, here's like a 3-parter episode as my like 5, 4, and 3, and here's a 2-parter episode as my 1 and 2. I just said, okay, I'll choose one episode from each kind of 2-parter or something like that to represent it on my list. And so basically 312 for me represents the book 3 finale. I chose it above the final episode, Venom of the Red Lotus, because I feel like in many ways this is the stronger episode, and that I feel it has stronger fights. And because fights are such an important aspect of book 3, because there's not a lot of character stuff going on, this for me is the stronger episode. This is the one where you have the death of Pili, when you after you just had that emotional scene between Zahir and Pili, she dies. You have the big kind of attack atop Guru Lahima, at Lahima's peak, and you have Korra for as far as she's aware, experienced the death of her father, and so you have the main hero and main villain kind of fighting each other after having both in their minds experienced the loss, and just the way that Pili's death leads into Zahir mastering the kind of ultimate form of airbending, the final technique, actual flying. It was just really well done, and one of the only real properly emotional things that went on with the Red Lotus, I think. In terms of them as characters, this really worked, and it was just an amazing fight in the way this whole plan was executed atop Gurulahima's peak. And then, you know, I think it just about beats out the final episode purely because I think the fight in the final episode is not the best. Korra versus Ahir, I think it's really well animated, but it's not much of an actual fight because Korra's obviously experiencing the poison, and Zahir's bending isn't that great. So 312 for me represents the book 3 finale, which has to have a place on my list. So that's my number 8, but onwards to number 7. So yeah, number 7 is K210, A New Spiritual Age. This is an award-winning episode. This episode won awards for its great designs of spirits and character stuff and stuff like that, and rightly so. This is an amazingly good visual episode of Korra, but it's not just all about the visuals and how great it is. There's some really good character stuff here as well. Like, we meet Iroh again. We get to see Korra, basically, you know, little girl Korra again. And overall, it just explores this idea of how, you know, for a spiritual person like Korra being the Avatar, your emotions can really influence the world around you in the spirit world. And again, it's just another thing that Book 2 does really well. It really gives you a good knowledge of the spirit world. Because in Avatar, we really didn't learn that much about it, but this episode, plus loads of the other episodes in this book, really do a good job. And having Iroh here as Korra's kind of mentor is just a wonderful thing to have again. And in addition to that, just you also have, you know, Jinora has guided Korra into the spirit world. She goes off. She meets Wan Shi Tong. You have his kind of betrayal, and you know he's working for Unalaq. And you turn this episode, which is very kind of just like visually cool, just it's really cool to explore the spirit world, into a really intense episode with, you know, Jinora being captured, Korra's big kind of journey in the spirit world, finally really, I suppose, finding herself as a spiritual person here, eventually turning from being as she sees herself in the spirit world, this kind of crying little girl, to, you know, being confident in the spirit world, and then having to save Jinora, and basically nearly dying herself, but and just a really tragic way to end the episode with her having to tell Tenzin what happened. I think it's a really strong episode that's extremely memorable, so that's definitely why it has a place in my top 10 list. But yeah, let's go onwards to number 6. The number 6 on my list is K108, When Extremes Meet. This is a really good episode. I think Book 1 in general doesn't get a lot of credit from the fandom, but there are some really good episodes in Book 1. And this is one of them. I think this is an amazing episode. This is what really Tarlok's main episode in terms of, like, this is him doing what he's doing in this book. This is the kind of Tarlok is a villain episode. And there's just so much going on in this one. And just the kind of rivalry that, you know, we've seen a little bit of in this series before, but this is where it really comes to a head. The rivalry between Korra and Tarlok. How this is kind of the formation of Team Avatar. They outdo Tarlok's task force, and he gets angry. So the next time they kind of meet out in the streets, he has Team Avatar arrested, and Korra's angry. And it all leads to this big confrontation in Tarlok's office where, you know, in terms of just a villain and a hero talking to each other, super intense, because you have them throwing things at each other, like, you know, you're using your power, Tarlok saying to Korra, you're using your power to kind of control the non-boundaries of the city. That's no different than anyone else. Her calling him out for basically being an alternate version of Amon, and that gets him angry. And eventually he starts the fight, and it's such a violent and intense fight. It's really memorable, actually, when you go back and watch this. It really is one of the top fights in the entire series. There's like it's one of the first times in the entire show where we really see characters like get injured in the middle of a fight. Like Korra gets cut from Tarlok's kind of machine gun ice dagger thing, and Korra is just like breaking down this building to hurt him. Like She's throwing whole walls at him. She's about to crush him, and is basically about to win the fight with by like fire punching him in the face when he reveals bloodbending, which is such an incredible reveal. And just in a book that's so full of mysteries about these villains, this was just another thing to add onto the pile where it's just like, wait, okay, we don't know anything about Amon just yet, but Tarlok's a bloodbender. It's so intense, and just like you're getting towards the end of the season at this point, and Korra's captured. Like, what's going on here? Like, there were some really great reveals back in book one, and this was just an incredible episode. So it had to have a place in my top 10. But let's go into the top 5 with number 5. Another book 1 episode here for number 5, and that's K111, Skeletons in the Closet. For similar reasons to the previous episode, I chose this When Extremes Meet because of how good of a kind of Tarlok episode it was. I chose this one because this is, for me, is the episode where book 1 becomes amazing. Because this links both villains together with a villain from Aang's past and connects it all together, connects it with bloodbending, connects it with Amon's ability to take bending away from other people, plus give you this kind of tragic and sympathetic backstory for the two villains. And really, like, it's one of those things where, like, Amon and Tarlok are really, like, some of the best villains in the Avatar universe that we have. And again, I think it's because it's book 1 that they don't really get the credit they deserve, when in fact they arguably have, like, one of the best backstories we've had in the Avatar universe, full stop. This idea that Yukon had basically got rid of his evil ways when he settled down with his wife, and he was happy to have these two kids, but the second he found out they were waterbenders, everything changed, and, you know, he started training them as tools of revenge, and eventually the kids realized that was the case, and kind of never wanted to be a part of this, but because of how tough he was on them, they just ended up doing this exact thing he wanted later in life, just in different ways. And the way it explains Amon becoming the Equalist leader, and that bending ruined his kind of childhood, ruined the family, and that's why he hates benders. And then with Tarlok, you know, he basically ends up doing what Yukon was doing, just from a more kind of legal standpoint. Like, he did it as a criminal, Yukon, Tarlok's trying to do it as a council member. It's such an interesting idea, and it just links into this whole tragic story of these two villains, and especially like in the next episode, Endgame, like when he does what he does, it's just extremely tragic that he felt that was the only way to really kind of end their story, that there was no happy ending, there was no resolution, it was just the two of them had to be out of the picture. It's really interesting, and as I said, Skeletons in the Closet just makes it with that backstory, just really well done. One of the best kind of like flashbacks that explains why the characters are the way they are, plus gives you sympathy for them, so I really love it. But next up, number 4 on my list. Yes, of course, the last episode of the entire series, K413 The Last Stand. This is the episode I'm going to choose to represent the overall Korra Book 4 finale. So the reason I chose this episode here is because, as I said multiple times, anytime I really mention the finale, it's hard to end a series that has such a big and passionate fandom well and satisfy everyone. It's basically impossible to satisfy absolutely everyone. But Avatar and Korra now have both ended their series very effectively. And this was a really good episode for that. Sure, you can maybe criticize the episode for the Korra-Kuvira fight not being as long or as epic as you thought it would be, but in terms of, I suppose, a sequence of just scenes between Korra and Kuvira, it's really well done. It's not really focused much on the fighting, more on just these kind of real powerful moments where, like, the fight is very quick. After the explosion of the Colossus, they run into the woods. Kuvira activates the spirit weapon among all these spirit vines, and so it's basically firing infinitely. And Korra, basically, her last act of bending that we see in the series is to bend, pure spirit energy and block the blast from hurting Kuvira. So she ends up saving the villain who she's trying to take down. And just in doing so has proven to Kuvira that she will never ever be on the same level of power as Korra or the Avatar. And just how that is ultimately what kind of defeats Kuvira. That knowing that she will never be at Korra's power level is what defeats her. And then the actual reveal of why Kuvira was doing what she was doing, it was interesting because she just got emotional. Like, she's been so controlled the entire series, and just to see her kind of break down a little bit and just kind of reveal that at a base level she was doing this to protect people so no one would ever be like she was when she was young. So there was a lot of understanding, and Korra could understand Kuvira because she had just gone through such a really hard experience herself in this book. So in a way it was Kuvira was the perfect kind of villain for Korra to fight in the final book. And then the epilogue with the Varric Li wedding, that was a really nice way to kind of, it's this kind of big event like the coronation from Avatar. It's the wedding in Korra, and then you also have the romantic moment to end the series. And Katara and Avatar, and then Korra and Asami here. Of course, I have my issues with Korra Asami primarily because the build up could have been done better, regardless of Nick's stance on the matter. But it's a strong moment. I think it was great that they actually just went down that road of doing it, and I hope they address it more, just so we can get more on what they're like as a couple, Korra and Asami. But definitely the book 4 finale, really strong episode. But yeah, let's get into the top 3 now. Number 3 is K402 Korra Alone. This is a really good character episode. It really lives up to the name, basically, thing that it has. Zuko alone from Avatar, Korra alone in Korra. It was a really strong Korra episode. After, the kind of whoa, what's going on here with Korra ending to episode 1 of book 4, this one had a lot to do in terms of explaining why Korra's in this position, and I think they did it really well with, basically you catch up with Korra immediately after she leaves at the end of book 1, and she flashes back herself, remembering the situations that brought her to where she is. And just in terms of an explanation of a character, exploration of a character who's, healing after such a kind of traumatic experience, it's done really well. With just her initial, physical recovery, and that happens. It's a real struggle for her, but with her mother and Katara's help, it really ends up happening as hard as it is, and you see her frustrations really come out, but it's completely understandable. Even Katara realizes that, and how she kind of helps Korra through this by kind of relating it to the pain that Aang went through with the loss of his people and stuff like that. So some really strong stuff there. And then when she is fully healed and basically asked her parents, I need to be in the middle of the action, what's holding her back at this point in time is the mental side of things. She doesn't feel like she's ready. She's afraid of getting hurt again, and so just she's doing everything she can to try and become the Avatar again. But until she feels that she's ready, she can't be the Avatar again. And that experience on the island, where she can't even take down those thieves, just really shows her that she doesn't want to be like that in Republic City, where she's just walking along the street and is asked to take down this villain, and she can't because she's not ready. She doesn't want to be the one to say, no, I'm still hurt, I can't do that. So until that point, she's going to go undercover, and you have that really incredible moment where she cuts her hair, changes her outfit, and kind of goes off on her own on this journey of exploration. But throughout the whole time, everything she's doing is to try and kind of heal herself, but nothing is working, and so she isolates herself more and more until she finds Toph. And it's just a really good episode at bringing you, explaining to you the end of episode 1, explaining to you Korra's thoughts from the end of book 3, and showing you where she's going to go from here in terms of Toph is going to be the one to help her. That's interesting, but also perfect because they're very similar characters in many ways. So Korra alone, my number 3. But let's move on to number 2. My second favourite episode of Korra is K214 Light in the Dark, the finale for Book 2 Spirits. I think this episode is wonderful. This is the kind of culmination of Korra's character arc in Book 2. And it's, for me, the best character arc that Korra has in the series. Because, it's such an important thing for Korra to know at this point in time. She's learned to be more spiritual. But at the same time as she basically becomes the most powerful she's ever going to be, becomes like super spiritual, masters all this avatar state stuff, these spiritual powers, she learns the lesson that, what makes you who you are is you. It's like who you are, not what you are, that lesson. And the fact that Tenzin learned this himself about, I'm Tenzin, not Aang, and then he taught this to Korra, it was really important. And then they did such an interesting thing here where they usually go for avatar state action to end these big battles, but they actually very specifically took Rava out of the picture in a really emotional scene in the previous episode, and have Korra take down Unavatu basically on her own with some help from Jinora. And again, the big two characters really in book 2 are kind of Korra and Jinora on the hero side of things. And the way the two of them just work together to take down Unalaq, basically they outspirit the spiritual master of this book. It is such an incredible way to do things. The way she uses his technique, the spiritual bending technique, and takes him out that way. And it's emotional because it plays into both themes of the book, spirits and family. She's using these spiritual techniques, but she's using it to effectively kill a member of her own family. And the way how she ends it, and she's not angry that she does this, and she says go in peace because she's learned, she's matured, that she's not angry at Unalaq. She knows what she's doing here. It's really incredible. And then most importantly, after this, what does she do with the portals? She decides to keep them open, which is what Unalaq ultimately wanted. That he disagreed with Wan closing them, and Korra decides that no, now is the time to keep them open. Unalaq may have been wrong about some things, but it's important for the world to move on here, and she makes that decision on her own, and it's really well done. And it's an incredible character arc for Korra to finish off book 2. So yeah, let's move on to my number 1 favorite episode of The Legend of Korra. At number 1, of course, you guys know me, it's K208 Beginnings Part 2. This is my favorite episode of Avatar by a long shot. I just adore both of these episodes, Beginnings Part 1 and Beginnings Part 2. But I choose Part 2 to represent this two-parter rather than Part 1 because, for me, the highlight of Beginnings is the Wan-Rava relationship. And really, you get most of it in Part 2. And effectively, that's what it is. Over the course of basically 2 minutes at the end of, Beginnings Part 1, and then the 22 minutes of Beginnings Part 2, you get the entire journey of Wan effectively as the Avatar. The entire scope of the relationship between Wan and Rava. And in such a short amount of time, they make you fall in love with Wan as a character, Rava as a character, and their relationship. And you understand why the Avatar came into being. And it really is the way they approach it is just so different than I think a lot of people expected. Myself included, I expected this to be very kind of epic, spirits making a decision with humanity to create this being, the Avatar, to act as this kind of balance between the two. But no, it's not this grand decision made by the spirits and humans. It's ultimately, Wan trying to fix a problem that he made, and the Avatar forms from just a friendship between a human and a spirit. That basically Wan teaches an all-knowing spirit something, and that's not to give up hope. And that's important. I think that's a key thing in these episodes, that throughout the entire series of Avatar and Korra, and even the comics, spirits are often treated as just these things that they act above humans. They have very little respect for humans. And Rava's kind of the same way in Beginnings Part 1 and even parts of this episode. But she learns from Wan to respect humans. and she learns from Wan to never give up hope. And she sees that within him, that there's something different about him, and understands, I suppose, humanity a bit more because of that. And so when you get to like one of the final scenes and Wan is dying after having not brought peace to the world, she is the one to turn that advice around on Wan, because they're friends. You know, like, I'll be with you for all of your lifetimes and we'll never give up. That is such an incredible moment, because it's not that the second they were bonded at harmonic convergence, the Avatar cycle was just going to continue. When Wan is dying, Rava basically personally makes the decision that she is going to do that. I'm pretty sure that that's what they're trying to say there, that it's a personal decision that Rava has been so kind of moved by Wan that she's willing to basically go along with this cycle, that she will be reborn within every reincarnation of Wan, and they'll basically be the Avatar. That's the formation of the Avatar. It's not some grand decision, some crazy spirit being. It's just basically friends, a spirit and a human. And it was really incredible the way they actually made a story that should be so epic and grand, and it is, with the Wan and Rava versus Vatu fight. So simple at a base level, and that's why I think these are the best episodes. I haven't even mentioned any of the other stuff about how Wan learns the other elements, like him, the different the older original airbenders and stuff like that. There's some really incredible stuff going on in these episodes. Getting to see the world 10,000 years ago, lion turtles are really important again. But also, in terms of Korra, it's an important episode to have at this moment as well, because Korra is seeing the formation of the Avatar just at the same time we are. And that plays importantly into basically the final battle, in that she knows how it went the first time and the decisions that Wan made. And, it's all about how, okay, she understands now that it's more about humans and spirits having a relationship rather than these epic fights. And I think that's the key thing, that she knows how important it is, that Wan was so important as a character because he became friends with spirits, and eventually Rava. And now she kind of has to try and make that happen, and that, I think, definitely influences her decision to keep the portals open. So yeah, definitely Beginnings is my favourite episode of Korra. But yeah, what were your thoughts on my list? What's your own list of top 10 Korra episodes? I'd love to know in the comments and get some discussion going. But yeah, next week what the top 10 list is going to be is top 10 fights in the Avatar universe. So I'm going to include Korra and Avatar stuff for this one, and just have it be top 10 fights in the Avatar universe. So yeah, look out for that one next week. But other than that, thanks for watching this video, and bye.